You know, we get these bits and pieces of what's really happening in the world, and then we fail to tie them together to bring forth the whole picture of what's really happening. Yesterday, when I posted my video about the National Religious Broadcasters Association meeting in Nashville with some of the top Israeli media and journalists there, including Tuli Weiss of Israel 365 News, I didn't talk about the part about Donald Trump speaking at this National Religious Broadcasters meeting where they signed this resolution to stop calling the West Bank in Israel and go back to the biblical names of Judea and Samaria. Well, if you remember, before the attacks on Israel on October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu was standing before the United Nations, and he held up this little chart showing what was going to happen, and that they were going to be laying fiber optic cable to try to connect to through Europe, through the Mediterranean Sea. They were going to try to connect with the rest of these nations, and part of the situation with getting Gaza has to do with having the ability to run it through there. So part of what I'm going to talk about is just what Donald Trump said at the Nashville speech. And, you know, considering that there's a plan already by Benjamin Netanyahu for Gaza after the war, and that they're now bringing Judea and Samaria back as the names of the places. So that means Israel will have gained Gaza, and they will have gained Judea and Samaria, and this is leading to really prophetic times. But about Donald Trump's speech before the National Religious Broadcasters, Trump vowed to support Christians during his Nashville speech and said, "Bring back our religion." And this was reported in the Tennessean by Vivian Jones. And it said, former President Donald Trump called on Christians to support his presidential bid, pledging, if elected, to, quote, protect God in the public square, end quote, defend Christian broadcasters and their pro-God content from censorship, and appoint a task force to fight anti-Christian bias, including federal prosecutions. Trump spoke to an enthusiastic crowd of about 1,500 Thursday evening at a presidential forum at the annual conference of the National Religious Broadcasters at the Gaylord Opryland Resort and Convention Center in Nashville. The nonprofit's annual convention is in Music City this week. Many in the crowd wore red and white hats with the phrase, "Make America Pray Again," provided by conference sponsor Pray.com, as wild cheers broke out to welcome the former president. I really believe it's the biggest thing missing from this country. The biggest thing, we have to bring back our religion. We have to bring back Christianity, Trump said, prompting a big cheer from the crowd. Despite a tight calendar of court appearances and campaigning, Trump appeared in Nashville with just 2 days to go before the South Carolina primary. The former president is the frontrunner against former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley in her home state. As he is here in Tennessee, voters here in the volunteer state will cast ballots on Super Tuesday on March 5th. Early voting is already underway. The National Religious Broadcasters, NRB, President Troy Miller, said that the organization invited all eligible candidates from both parties to participate in the presidential forum, and Trump was the only candidate who was available to attend. The NRB has not endorsed Trump's presidential bid. and lines for the presidential forum already snaked through the Opryland Hotel lobby just after 3 p.m. But Trump, who was scheduled to take the stage around 8 p.m. Central Time, kept the hyped crowd waiting. The room was far from packed. At about 8:40 p.m., nearly an hour before Trump took the stage, staff urgently began removing hundreds of chairs from the back corner of the room. About 200 empty seats on the far side of the room remained. Before Trump walked on stage, the crowd stood in recognition of the January 6th hostages, referring to those who face federal charges for their role in storming the U.S. Capitol. His speech began at 9:42 p.m. and wrapped shortly before 11 p.m. During his opening comments, Trump blamed the delay on rough weather during his flight. Trump asked the crowd of Christian broadcasters and media to support his bid for the White House, pledging to defend Christians from domestic persecution, censorship, and infringements on their rights. Let's call out these brave Americans what they really are, persecuted Christians, Trump said. Meanwhile, Trump accused the Biden administration of targeting Christian believers and pledged, if elected again, to appoint a special task force to rapidly review the cases of every political prisoner. Remember, every communist regime throughout history has tried to stamp out the churches, just like every fascist regime is trying to go up and control them, he said. In America, the radical left is trying to do both at the same time. Trump pledged to establish a new federal task force on fighting anti-Christian bias. Its mission will be to investigate all forms of illegal discrimination, harassment, and persecution against Christians in America, Trump said. No one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration, he added, to a big applause from the crowd. That's really interesting statement. No one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration. That could mean something either good or bad, really. Trump also claimed, without evidence, that religious broadcasters are under siege, pledging, if elected, to protect content that is pro-God. We will protect God in our public square, Trump said. I will not allow the media or left-wing groups to silence you, censor you, discriminate against you, or in any way tell you what you have to say. Trump briefly mentioned his multiple criminal indictments, claiming them as political persecution. I take all these arrows for you, and I'm so proud to take them, he said. I'm being indicted for you, outstretching his arms as if on a cross. He touted efforts to support Israel during his presidency, citing his administration's move to relocate the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and pledged to stand strongly with Israel, prompting a standing ovation from much of the crowd. During his speech, Trump invited former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, up on stage to provide remarks. Friedman, who wore a medallion around his neck to remember the more than 100 Israeli hostages still in Hamas captivity, told Trump that the October 7th attack on southern Israel would not have happened had Trump still been in office. The crowd stood cheering several times as Trump rolled through a list of other priorities, including expanding school choice options, abolishing the U.S. Department of Education, securing the southern U.S. border with Mexico, defeating the toxic force of gender ideology, keeping men out of women's sports, and prohibiting child mutilation in all 50 states. In the end, we do not answer to bureaucrats in Washington. We answer to God in heaven, Trump said. He's one of us. Those attending were overwhelmingly supportive of the former president, and much of the conference carried similar themes as his speech. Fritz von Tagen of Washington State traveled to Nashville for the NRB conference to exhibit his company, which develops backgrounds for virtual reality television. Von Tagen, who was wearing a red MAGA hat and an Israeli lapel pin with a flag, said he hopes Trump is reelected for the sake of small business owners like himself. I want to hear his plan to put our country back together. We're hurting badly, Von Tagen told the Tennessean. Our company really started growing until this last administration. It's doing well, but not near as well as it would be normally. There's a lot more people working now that know nothing about the English language. They can't speak English, Von Tagen added. I feel bad that all of those illegal people are taking jobs away from the Americans. And might I add that they're supplying hotel rooms and paying for all of their hotel expenses when Americans like me are having to live in a hotel because they took away our family home of 48 years when my mom died. I mean, it had to be sold, so it's gone. And there's no way of me getting it back. And there's no help from the county, because they're helping all of the migrants and illegal aliens. Jim Sheldon of Kentucky, whose company is also exhibiting at NRB, said he was looking forward to hearing directly from the former president with no spin. Trump is just, I think, one of us, really. He's a billionaire, but he's one of us. So this is one of the things that was happening in Opryland. So as I told you yesterday, while he was there, these religious broadcasters with the Israeli media, they signed this biblical heartland resolution that will prevent the media from continuing to use the term West Bank. Now, it is the West Bank where the Palestinians hoped to establish a seat of government, and particularly in Jericho, and that they want to create a Palestinian state from that place. So, as we know, just before the attacks on Israel, we had Netanyahu at the United Nations giving a plan for this fiber optic cable that would connect all of these countries with Israel. And so CNN reported that Netanyahu unveils plan for Gaza's future post-Hamas. This is by Richard Allen Green and Elliot Gutkind in CNN. And it says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addresses the Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations amid the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Palestinian Islamic group Hamas in Jerusalem on February 18th. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu unveiled a plan for Gaza's future post-Hamas, which includes the complete demilitarization of the enclave, closing off the territory's southern border with Egypt, as well as the overhaul of Gaza's civil administration and education systems. CNN has obtained a copy of the plan, which Netanyahu presented to members of Israel's security cabinet Thursday night. It was distributed as a basis for discussion, the Prime Minister's office told CNN, in preparation of future talks, and comes after Netanyahu faced weeks of criticism for having no concrete plan for a post-war Gaza. The plan comes as Israel sent a negotiating team led by Mossad Director David Barnea to Paris on Friday to pursue talks over a potential ceasefire and hostage release deal that may put an end to the 4-month-long war. More than 29,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, according to the Ministry of Health in the enclave. Hamas's October 7th attack killed 1,200 people in Israel, according to Israeli authorities. A number of principles are outlined in the document, from changes on the security and civil levels to more long-term plans about who governs the territory. So we're talking about them retaking the West Bank and renaming it to the biblical Judea and Samaria, and at the same time gaining back the territory of Gaza and having long-term plans for it. On the security file, the envisioned plan includes Israel closing off Gaza's southern border with Egypt, giving Israel complete control of entry and exit from the enclave. At present, Egypt controls access to and from Gaza's southern border via the Rafah crossing. And Netanyahu's plan says Israel will cooperate as much as possible with Egypt in coordination with the United States. It is not clear whether Israel has obtained Egypt's sign-off on that element of the plan or any part of it, but an Israeli official told CNN that the plan was aligned with the U.S., and there has been no immediate official U.S. reaction to the proposal. The plan asserts, as Netanyahu has said before, that Israel will have security control over the entire area west of Jordan. So there's your West Bank. Israel will have entire security control over the entire area west of Jordan. So it says, which includes all of the West Bank and Israel as well as Gaza. So you've got to fit all of these pieces together. What's happening in Nashville with the national religious broadcasters and Donald Trump and his pro-Israel agenda. This is all being orchestrated to get the prophetic ball rolling. So, again, it says Israel will have security control over the entire area west of Jordan, which includes all of the West Bank, that they want to rename Judea and Samaria again, and Israel as well as Gaza. The Palestinians have long sought an independent state in the occupied West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. Israel will be responsible for realizing and overseeing the demilitarization of the Strip, the plan says, except for what is required to maintain public order. On the civil level, Netanyahu details an overhaul of Gaza's civil administration and education systems. Now, Donald Trump just mentioned shutting down the education system here as it stands. So that's an interesting connection there. Including an apparent cutoff of funding from Qatar to Gaza, which a previous Netanyahu government approved and facilitated. The local entities running the civil service, quote, will not be identified with countries or entities that support terrorism and will not receive payment from them, the plan says. While it's likely a reference to Qatar is not clear if it would also apply to the Palestinian Authority, a revitalized version of which the U.S. has said should run Gaza in the future. The Netanyahu plan also calls for de-radicalization in the education system, which Israel and its allies have long accused of promoting anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel. The plan repeats that Israel will work to shut down the UNRWA, the main United Nations agency supporting Palestinian refugees, and work to replace it with responsible international aid agencies. Well, this is where I'm telling you that they want to remove the United Nations completely and replace it there in Jerusalem with the overhaul of the judicial system with Sanhedrin, ultra-Orthodox rabbis as the judges, which will eventually be turned into the world's Supreme Court, the world judges, where they will enforce their ideas upon the world. So this is a really important statement that Israel will work to shut down the main United Nations agency. And this is the reason for it. They want to re-implement the ancient system of the Sanhedrin. So they would have representatives of each of the 70 nations there at the Sanhedrin building, and they would appoint a king to be the world leader. And this is how it's, I mean, you can see how it's developing in this article here. Israel accuses about a dozen UNRWA employees of being directly involved in the October 7th Hamas attack. The agency employs about 13,000 people in Gaza. And finally, the plan reiterates Israel's insistence that it will not be forced by the international community to recognize a Palestinian state, a possibility the United Kingdom and U.S. President Joe Biden have begun to float. That's very interesting. So Israel outright rejects international dictates regarding a permanent settlement with the Palestinians. The Netanyahu outline says, asserting that recognition of a Palestinian state now would be, quote, a huge reward to unprecedented terrorism, end quote. Many of the proposals are opposed by key parties. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has already rejected the idea of a buffer zone. Egypt has rejected the suggestion that Israel could control its border with Gaza. And the United Arab Emirates has said that without a clear roadmap towards an independent Palestinian state ruled out by Netanyahu, it won't help foot the bill for Gaza's reconstruction. Netanyahu's vow to eliminate UNRWA, the UN aid agency that supplies most international aid to Gaza, would have been difficult to achieve even before October 7th. Now, as the UN warns that almost all of the population of Gaza is at risk of imminent famine, and the task would be enormous. There is no mention in the plan of the Palestinian Authority, which administers parts of the occupied West Bank. Netanyahu has previously rejected the suggestion that it could take control of Gaza. It's not clear whether he would now accept a reconstituted version taking over, and it is far from clear this would be accepted by Palestinians, more of whom voted for Hamas in elections in 2006. And for now, Netanyahu's priority remains destroying Hamas and returning more than 100 hostages kidnapped October 7th who remain in Gaza. Getting hostage talks back on track is a key goal of the top delegation that Netanyahu sent to Paris on Friday. The U.S. and others hope a deal will forestall a ground operation in Rafah that could push the death toll in Gaza to well above 30,000. Most observers believe that once the war is over, elections in Israel are inevitable, which Netanyahu and his allies are predicted to lose. But it is far from clear that a different leader, war cabinet member and former opposition leader Benny Gantz, is touted as the favorite, would have much of a different vision for Gaza. So let's put another piece of this puzzle together. Let's go back to September 23rd of 2023, when Benjamin Netanyahu stood in front of the United Nations with a red marker in his hand and holding up a map showing the new Middle East. And I won't read the entire speech. I'll start at the important point here. He said, and this is Netanyahu's words, 2 weeks ago, we saw another blessing already in sight. In the G20 conference, President Biden, Prime Minister Modi, and European and Arab leaders announced plans for a visionary corridor that will stretch across the Arabian Peninsula and Israel. It will connect India to Europe with maritime links, rail links, energy pipelines, and fiber optic cables. This corridor will bypass maritime choke points and dramatically lower the cost of goods, communication, and energy for over 2 billion people. So who are they going to choke out but Egypt? So this is interesting that he's projecting that the goal for Gaza is to shut the control of the southern border of Gaza, not allowing Egypt to control that anymore, and Israel to take control because they want to bypass Egypt. It's considered a choke point with Egypt. So putting that together with this, you can see what's really happening. And what a historic change for my country, he said. You see, the land of Israel is situated on the crossroads between Africa, Asia, and Europe. And for centuries, my country was repeatedly invaded by empires passing through it in their campaign of plunder and conquest elsewhere. And that by the hand of God, I might add, because of their sins against God in playing the scarlet harlot against him. But today, as we tear down the walls of enmity, Israel can become a bridge of peace and prosperity between these continents. Peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia will truly create a new Middle East. So understand the magnitude of the transformation that we seek to advance. Let me show you a map of the Middle East in 1948, the year Israel was established. Here is Israel in 1948, a tiny country isolated, surrounded by a hostile Arab world. In our first 70 years, we made peace with Egypt and Jordan, and then in 2020, we made the Abraham Accords, peace with another 4 Arab states. Now look at what happens when we make peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The whole Middle East changes. We tear down the walls of enmity. We bring the possibility of peace to this entire region. But we do something else. You know, I stood here a few years ago with a red marker to show the curse, a great curse, the curse of a nuclear Iran. But today I bring this marker to show a great blessing, the blessing of a new Middle East between Israel, Saudi, and our other neighbors. We will not only bring down barriers between Israel and our neighbors, we will build a new corridor of peace and prosperity that connects Asia through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel to Europe. And this is an extraordinary change, a monumental change, another pivot of history. As the circle of peace expands, I believe that a real path towards a genuine peace with our Palestinian neighbors can finally be achieved. But there's a caveat. It has to be said here forcefully, peace can only be achieved if it's based on truth. It cannot be based upon lies. It cannot be based on the endless vilification of the Jewish people. And so here's the thing. When he shows the map, you can see that this corridor runs through Gaza, the Gaza Strip, across the Mediterranean and up into, Italy and France. And then the other direction, it's attached down there too for a new Middle East. And then the speech proceeds to go on telling that Iran is the fly in the ointment. And he says, let us bring forth the blessings of a new Middle East that will transform lands once ridden with conflict and chaos into fields of prosperity and peace. And may we avoid the perils of AI by combining the forces of human and machine intelligence to usher in a brilliant future for our world in our time and for all time. So he's pushing the AI, which is interesting. But this plan for this corridor was already in place just before the October 7th attack happened, where a lot of the people that had been members of the Mossad, and the Mossad is like right there where the Hamas went through the gate, and Benjamin Netanyahu allowed funding of Hamas leading up to this whole event. This was already written November 24th of 2020. Google plans fiber optic cable linking Saudi Arabia and Israel as it connects India to Europe and opens a new route for global internet traffic. And it says, Google has begun laying the groundwork for a new fiber optic internet cable from India to Europe that could be routed through arch rivals Saudi Arabia and Israel. The tech giant wants to build the $400 million cable dubbed Blue Ramen to bypass the regional choke point of Egypt. Holy moly. So now do you see why Israel had to take Gaza and shut Egypt off from controlling the southern port of entry? Oh my gosh, this is so clear that they want to bypass the regional choke point of Egypt And this is exactly why Israel had to take control of Gaza and control over the Rafah crossing so that Egypt no longer controls that entry point, but Israel controls it. It's all planned out before the attacks happened. Plans would instead see the cable go from Mumbai to Saudi via the Red Sea, then up through Jordan and Israel across the Mediterranean and into Italy. The project is taking shape as Arab states thaw decades of frozen relations with Israel and amid claims that Saudi is working towards recognizing the Jewish state. So here is the map showing it going from India, and you could see that it goes through the Gaza Strip area right near, close to the Rafah crossing that Egypt controls. So they want to choke that off, and this has been the plan since 2020. I'm not supposed to be figuring this out, people. But God gives me intelligence to figure it out and piece it all together. Thank God. Bahrain, the UAE, and Sudan have already agreed to establish ties with Israel, breaking with decades-old demand among Arab states that recognizing Palestine was a necessary precursor to any deal with Israel. And while the deals are historic in themselves, President Trump, whose administration has been overseeing the process, suggested that 9 other Arab states, including Saudi, were also getting ready to sign up. Now, this was written in 2020, so while Saudi and Israel have made no official moves to establish ties, it was reported this week that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi. And the meeting was the first of its kind of 2 senior officials from those countries. Saudi subsequently denied the meeting had taken place and Netanyahu's office refused to comment. But flight logs showed that a jet the Israeli leader often uses had flown between the 2 countries on the day in question. So they're doing this secretly and then in your face, projecting that they're creating a new Middle East, choking out Egypt. Because of the Middle East's volatile politics, the vast majority of internet cables from Asia to Europe passed through Egypt. According to blog Open Cables, 1/3 of the world relies on Egypt for its internet access, leaving networks vulnerable to problems in the country. That dependency also allows Egypt to charge exorbitant fees to cable operators, with the Israel-Saudi route thought to be up to 50% cheaper to run. Sources at the company told WSJ the route would still change and may have to run through Egypt if Saudi refuses to play ball. But if Riyadh gives its permission, then it could provide the first strategic link between the 2 old foes. Israel's communications minister Yoaz Hendel has previously welcomed the prospect of using the cable to strengthen ties with its regional neighbors. In any place where you can lay down cables overland or undersea, you also create mutual interest. Saudi Arabia's aging King Salman is thought to bitterly oppose normalizing relationships between his kingdom and Israel. But his young heir, Mohammed bin Salman, is seen as a reformer who may bring about change on the issue. And bin Salman has already spearheaded changes in the kingdom that has already allowed women more rights and is overseeing an agenda that will diversify Saudi's economy away from oil and towards green energy and tourism. Okay, so the whole thing here is obvious that they're going to choke out Egypt because most of the cable is running through Egypt that provides the internet in the fiber optic cable. So now, understanding that they planned to choke out Egypt from having all of this control and charging exorbitant amounts for the cable running through the country and controlling it, they want to run through Gaza, ironically, right where Israel is trying to control Egypt from having any more control of that southern border there at Rafah. Google has begun in 2020 laying the groundwork for a new undersea fiber optic cable. The cable would carry internet traffic between India and Europe via the Middle East. Rather than pass through traditional choke point of Egypt, it would be routed through long-standing enemies Saudi Arabia and Israel. Comes after UAE and Sudan and Bahrain established ties with the Jewish state, and Trump suggested Saudi could follow suit. This is truly incredible. It's been in the works even before the attacks. People that were members of the Mossad, women that were a member of it, said not even a tiny insect could get past the gate where a mosque came through without setting off the alarm bells. And remember Mossad's motto, by way of deception. And Jesus told us in the last days, do not be deceived. All of this comes together telling you what's been in the works for a mighty long time. Now, this did not just involve the fiber optic cable, but Netanyahu's pitch was itself an extension of proposed energy links with Cyprus and Greece as part of growing collaboration on energy in the wake of discoveries of significant natural gas deposits in the economic zones of both Israel and Cyprus. Netanyahu repeated that he and Christodoulidis are looking to follow through on plans for a 2,000 megawatt undersea electricity cable known as the Eurasia Interconnector connecting Israel with Cyprus and Greece that aims to act as an energy supply backup for both Israel and Cyprus. Quote, you want to be connected to other sources of power that can allow a more optimal use of power or give you power when there's a failure in your own country, Netanyahu said. That is something that we're discussing seriously and we hope to achieve. Another energy link involves a Cypriot proposal to build a pipeline that would convey offshore natural gas from both Israel and Cyprus to the East Mediterranean island nation, where it would be fuel for electricity generators or potentially be liquefied for export by ship. And what do we see in the book of Revelation? That a third of the ships in the sea were destroyed. I think this is really interesting. And I told you there was an amazing connection between the King's Commonwealth countries taking up a third of the world. Christodoulidis said, given Europe's need for energy diversification in light of Russia's war with Ukraine, Cyprus and Israel are looking to developing a reliable energy corridor linking the East Mediterranean basin to Europe through projects including gas pipelines and liquefied natural gas, known as LNG, processing plants. Netanyahu said his government fully backs a European decision to create a regional firefighting hub in Cyprus from which aircraft and other technology could be dispatched to help put out fires in neighboring countries. The climate isn't going to get cooler, it's going to get hotter. And with the heating up of our region, he said, and the globe, firefighting becomes a really important thing. We can, I think, do better together, he said. So there were talks between him, Netanyahu, the Cyprus leader, and the Greek prime minister. Since 2016, such meetings between the leaders of the three countries have become a staple of what they said are burgeoning ties that Netanyahu described as a deep friendship, both personal but also between our nations, that is real and long overdue. This is just incredible. So they are not only doing the fiber optic cable line, but the pipeline that would convey offshore natural gas, and this undersea electricity cable and gas and energy is all connected to what this plan is. And looking at this map, it looks like this corridor goes right through the Gaza Strip. So it would not have been possible for Israel to accomplish this and choke off Egypt from controlling it unless they took Gaza. Now you know why the war happens over there right now. Now you know that it was all a plan to begin with. And that's why the Mossad had no clue that Hamas was going to attack, when actually Netanyahu allowed Hamas to be funded through Qatar. Wow. What a web we weave when we practice to deceive. So do not be deceived in these last days. The Christian church has been believing that Israel is all good, but we have these members of the Antichrist spirit in Benjamin Netanyahu's government that are trying to become the Knesset members of the Sanhedrin to put in the new judicial reforms. And that is what was happening with protests within Israel, that the Jewish people were fighting the judicial overhaul, and then the attacks of the war happened with Hamas. And it stopped all of the protests, and all they're talking about now is unity. Wow. So sometimes it helps when you played Nancy Drew when you were a kid, because you can figure these things out, and you can put these different pieces of what's happening together and go, oh, I see. I get the big picture. Trump is part of it, and he's going to get back in the presidency, and he's going to do whatever he can to promote these rabbis and Israel and all of this and put these things in place. He's right now helping put into place the biblical Heartland resolution of taking away the name West Bank and renaming it Judea and Samaria, because the Jewish people plan to take control over that area as well as Gaza, and it all comes together, and then this pipeline, cable corridor can go through, and they can become more wealthy. So Mystery Babylon, the great mother of harlots, becomes rich, and these people dictate to the rest of the world what to do religiously. You can see how it's all coming together, and all they have to do is appoint the king, become part of the Commonwealth, in which they plan to create peace and security for Israel already. That's been signed in March of last year with the UK with Israel. So the covenant with many in blood with the red heifer ceremony is coming. If white hairs are not found on the red cow, then I suppose that they will go through with the ceremony come April 22nd, around that date. That's when Passover starts on the calendar. That's when they would set it up, would be the evening or the day of Passover. Passover starts that evening, so it could be the next day. But usually they do the sacrifice that evening, Passover evening. So time will tell. Wow, this just blows my mind. And seeing the map and seeing that corridor go through the Gaza Strip tells me they have been planning this far longer than the October 7th events. And I guess they figure, you know, if a few hundred people die, it's for the sake of the good of the whole country. Isn't that what Caiaphas said about Jesus, that it was better for one man to die than for the whole nation to perish? And so they killed and crucified their own king, Jesus Christ, the Messiah of Israel, the true heir of the throne of Judah. So he sees and he knows everything that's happening. Anyway, I hope that you are benefiting from hearing these connections that I'm trying to make through God's divine providence of helping me understand what's happening and how it's all being set up. So anyway, if you want to support my channel, I would really need the help and appreciate that. I'll leave the links underneath the video if you would like to do that. And also, God has reopened the door for me to get back to the second book that I was working on, which has incredible information about the Lord that's going to blow people away. And I haven't been able to work on it since, you know, being rooted out of my home with Mom dying and all of that. But I'm hoping and praying that God will allow this event that's starting to happen with me being able to get back to it, even though I no longer have our desktop computer. I'm hoping and praying that I will be able to complete the job for the Lord that He started in me. And thank you for watching, and I pray that this helps you to see how it's all coming to pass prophetically. All right, well, I'll see you later on. I'll try to get this posted by this evening, hopefully. This is so astonishing. Just so astonishing. Wow. All right, well, they're all in it together. We can see that clearly. And we can see why things happened. Good night, guys.